My daughter called me her adorable little retirement project at her own six-figure wedding, the one I was paying for. The condescension was infuriating, but I let it go. That is until I overheard her on the phone telling her friend that my entire life's work was a professional disaster that had to be hidden from her new important family. She had absolutely no idea that her embarrassing mother had just bought her new husband's company, and I decided the perfect time to make the announcement was during my wedding toast. The air in the Beacon Hill ballroom was thick with the scent of money and lilies. It was the kind of old, quiet wealth that doesn't shout, it just is. Heavy damask curtains, crystal chandeliers that looked like frozen waterfalls, and a wedding planner who spoke in the hushed, reverent tones usually reserved for a library. My daughter Lucy was in her element. She sat perfectly poised, her posture a testament to years of ballet and boarding school, a file of swatches and invoices open before her, like a general planning a campaign. Her fiancé, Mark, a nice enough young man from a good family, with an impressive title at some tech firm on Route 128, just nodded along. His eyes glazed over. He knew his only job was to agree and eventually to show up. This was Lucy's production, her grand performance. And I, her mother, was the silent producer. The First National Bank of Mom. She was explaining with a dazzling smile to the planner why the imported French champagne was a non-negotiable. It wasn't about the taste, you see. It was about the brand alignment with Mark's partners. She used words like that corporate jargon sprinkled into everyday life. Everything was about optics, about synergy, about leveraging assets. I was beginning to feel like a poorly performing asset myself. I suggested that a top-tier California sparkling wine would be just as lovely and would save enough to pay for a small car. Lucy's smile didn't falter, but it tightened at the edges. She gave me that look, the one that was both loving and deeply patronizing. The one that said, "Oh, Mom, you just don't understand." The wedding planner, a woman named Deirdre with pearls the size of small grapes, asked me what I did. Before I could answer, Lucy jumped in, patting my hand. She told Deirdre that her mother was retired, but had an adorable little retirement project to keep her busy, a little business consultancy. She said it with such affection, framing me as this sweet, slightly bored widow who dabbled in spreadsheets to pass the time. I saw the look on Deirdre's face, a polite, dismissive little smile. She'd placed me in a box, quiet suburban harmless, not a player in the world that mattered their world. I just smiled back. It's amazing what you can learn when people underestimate you. They stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as a piece of furniture. And furniture hears everything. Later, as we were packing up, Lucy slid an invoice across the polished mahogany table. It was from the caterer. The number was breathtaking. She launched into a carefully rehearsed explanation. It wasn't just food. It was an experience. Mark's boss, the CEO, was coming. People from his firm, big people with Ivy League degrees and summer homes on the Cape would be there. They needed to see a certain standard. It was, she said, an investment in their future, in their network. It wasn't a request. It was a directive wrapped in the language of love and necessity. I looked at the number, then at my daughter's anxious, determined face. She wasn't just planning a wedding. She was shoring up her defenses against a lifetime of perceived inadequacy. I simply nodded and told her I would take care of it. Her relief was so profound, so immediate, that it felt like a physical thing in the room. She hugged me, told me I was the best, and for a moment, she was my little girl again. But the moment passed. We walked out into the crisp Boston air. I realized I'd left my favorite cashmere scarf, a gift from my late husband, draped over my chair. I told Lucy I'd be right back and slipped back into the quiet opulence of the ballroom. As I reached our table, I heard her voice from the grand entryway where she was on the phone. Her tone was completely different. The warmth was gone, replaced by a raw, frantic edge. It was the voice of someone terrified, the real Lucy that lived just beneath the polished surface. She was talking to her maid of honor. Her voice a sharp, panicked whisper. She said she had to keep my little business thing quiet. She couldn't have people asking questions. She said Mark's boss would be there. And then came the words that landed like a punch to the gut, stealing the air from my lungs. She said I can't have people thinking we come from that. It would be a professional disaster. That. My life, my work, my entire existence reduced to a vague, embarrassing that. The quiet life that had paid for her elite education. The pharmacy I'd owned and run for 30 years that had funded the down payment for her condo. The hobby business that was about to pay for this entire six-figure performance. I stood there hidden in the shadows of the grand ballroom, the soft cashmere of my scarf clutched in my hand. The hurt was a cold, sharp thing. But beneath it, something else was stirring. A quiet, analytical part of my brain, the part that built my businesses, began to calculate. The performance was about to go on, just not the one my daughter had planned. By the way, if you're enjoying the story so far, please consider subscribing so you don't miss what's next. We'd also love to hear your own story if you'd like to share it with our community. Now, let's get back to it. I drove home from Beacon Hill in a daze. The city lights blurred into long streaks of gold and red, but I wasn't seeing them. I was hearing that one word over and over again. That. My daughter's entire world was a carefully constructed stage, and I was the piece of ugly, embarrassing furniture from her past that had to be hidden away in the attic. The pain was immense, a physical ache in my chest. It felt like grief, like I had lost the daughter I thought I knew. I let myself feel it for the entire drive. I parked in my quiet suburban driveway, sat in the silence of the car, and let the grief wash over me. And then I let it go. Because grief is a passive emotion. What replaced it was cold, clear, and sharp. It was the same feeling I got right before a hostile takeover, the quiet hum of a complex machine clicking into place. My daughter lived in a world of optics and appearances. I was about to introduce her to a world of consequences and reality. The next morning, I didn't spend my time looking through old photo albums. I went to my home office. It's a spare room, nothing like the glass-walled corner offices Lucy so admired. It has a simple desk, a powerful computer, and 3 monitors. It's the cockpit of my adorable little retirement project. On one of those monitors, I pulled up a file on Mark's company and its CEO, a man named Arthur Vance. I knew he was on the wedding guest list. I knew his company was in the final stages of a very quiet, very hostile acquisition by an anonymous investment group. My investment group. From a secure, encrypted email account under the name M. Green, I drafted a message. It was a work of art, if I do say so myself. Brief, polite, and utterly devastating. It was addressed directly to Mr. Vance. It referenced a highly specific, confidential detail about the merger's financing, a detail only a handful of people on the planet would know. I ended the email with a simple, elegant line that was both a promise and a threat. I wrote that I was looking forward to discussing it further. Then I hit send. The first move on the chessboard had been made. I didn't have to wait long. Around lunchtime, my phone rang. It was Lucy. Her voice was stretched tight like a wire about to snap. She told me Mark was in a complete panic. He'd gotten a frantic call from his CEO. Some mysterious investor, M. Green, had sent an email that had, in her words, made the whole C-suite freak out. My daughter, bless her heart, couldn't have cared less about the multi-million-dollar merger. Her concern was that Mark was now distracted. He was stressed. And his stress was threatening the perfect, serene atmosphere she had curated for her wedding week. She dismissed the email as some bizarre coincidence, some annoying corporate drama. She actually told me Mark needed to get a handle on it so it wouldn't spill over into the rehearsal dinner. Her anxiety, completely misdirected, then found a new target: me. To regain her sense of control, she started micromanaging my existence. She needed to know exactly what I was planning to wear. She suggested a few more appropriate designers. She wanted a list of the people I planned to speak with at the reception. She told me it was probably best if I avoided talking about my little business, as it might confuse people. I listened to it all, the panic and fear rolling off her in waves, and I agreed to everything. I was the perfect docile mother, easily contained. She hung up the phone, sounding relieved, as if she'd just successfully put out a fire. She had no idea she was standing in a room soaked with gasoline, and I was the one holding the match. A few moments after her call ended, my own phone buzzed with a notification. It wasn't a text message, but a secure, encrypted signal from an old colleague, my right hand in the business world for over 20 years. The message contained only 5 words. It read, "Phase 1 complete. They're spooked." I looked at the message then out the window at my quiet, unassuming neighborhood. The game was on. In the week leading up to the wedding, I became the mother Lucy had always wanted: quiet, agreeable, and completely docile. It was a role I played with theatrical precision. I praised her choice of linens, which were, I'll admit, a very tasteful shade of cream. I agreed to the seating chart that placed me at a table with her father's distant, uninteresting cousins. When she sent me links to a handful of beige mother-of-the-bride dresses that were designed to make a woman fade into the wallpaper, I replied with a simple, cheerful, "Perfect. I'll order one now." I was a ghost at the feast of my own financing, and Lucy, my dear, anxious daughter, was so beautifully relieved. You could see the tension leaving her shoulders. With her mother safely managed and contained, she could focus on the million other details that defined her self-worth. The corporate drama at Mark's firm seemed to have settled down, or at least he'd stopped talking about it, which was all that mattered to her. She was magnanimous in her victory. She would call me just to chat, her voice full of the bright, brittle warmth she used when she felt she was in complete control of a situation. She was proud of herself, proud of her ability to handle everything, to manage every variable to ensure her grand performance would be flawless. She had no idea that while she was agonizing over font choices for the place cards, I was finalizing the acquisition of a $90 million technology company. It's funny, the contrast. One afternoon, I was on the phone with her for an hour, listening to an exhaustive breakdown of why hydrangeas were a better choice than peonies for the centerpieces. I made all the right noises of maternal interest. But in my mind, I was somewhere else entirely. I was back in a sleek, minimalist boardroom out on the Route 128 tech corridor from the day before. The room was all glass and brushed steel, overlooking a landscape of autumn trees. I was at the head of a long, polished table, and the 10 people sitting around it, my board of directors, were all looking at me. They didn't see a sweet, retired woman with a hobby. They saw M. Green. My voice in that room was not the soft, agreeable tone I used with Lucy. It was quiet, yes, but it was incisive. It was the voice of a person who had built an empire from nothing, who could see the flaws in a balance sheet from a mile away. In that room, I gave the final quiet order to execute the takeover of Mark's company. There was no anxiety, no drama, just a calm, unanimous vote of assent from people who trusted me implicitly. Then I excused myself to take a call about hydrangeas. The night before the wedding, at the rehearsal dinner, Lucy's sense of triumphant control reached its peak. The dinner was at a private club, the kind that prided itself on old money and discretion. The air was thick with the scent of leather and accomplishment. Feeling confident and expansive, Lucy stood to give a toast. She raised her crystal glass of champagne, the very expensive French kind, of course. She thanked everyone for coming, her voice ringing with performative sincerity. Then she turned to me. She smiled, that dazzling, dismissive smile, and began to thank her wonderful mother. She told the room how I'd been her rock, how supportive I'd been, and then the final arrogant nail in her own coffin. She spoke of how touched she was that I had insisted on paying for the wedding, dipping into what she called my modest retirement savings to make her dream come true. She framed it as the ultimate gift of a loving, simple mother who had given her last nest egg to see her daughter happy. A few people looked at me and smiled a sort of polite, pitying acknowledgement. They saw exactly what she wanted them to see, a quaint, harmless old woman, a relic from a less ambitious world, whose only remaining purpose was to fund the ascendancy of the next generation. I just smiled back, raised my glass, and took a sip. The performance was nearly over. The curtain was about to rise. On the morning of the wedding, I didn't feel nervous. I felt a profound and unsettling calm. I sat in my own quiet hotel suite, a few floors below the chaotic bridal suite, where Lucy was being lacquered and pinned into perfection. I knew that at precisely 9 a.m., an official email drafted by my lawyers and approved by the board would be sent to all senior employees of Mark's company. It was a standard corporate communication announcing the finalization of an acquisition. But buried in the attachments was a new leadership chart. And at the very top of that chart was a name, Margaret Green, next to a pleasant, smiling photograph of me. I took a slow sip of my tea. The earthquake was scheduled for 9. I could picture the scene in Lucy's suite perfectly. The air would be thick with hairspray and nervous energy. Bridesmaids in matching silk robes would be taking selfies, glasses of mimosas sweating on the tables. And in the center of it all, my daughter, the star of the show, having her face painted into a mask of bridal perfection. It was the apex of her performance, the moment just before the curtain rose. I imagined Mark walking in, looking handsome in his suit, probably trying to steal a quiet moment with his bride before the ceremony. And I imagined him glancing at his phone, his brow furrowing, as he saw the email notification marked urgent. I could see his face as he read it, the color draining away, the polite smile collapsing into disbelief, then horror. I could see him walking over to Lucy, his movements stiff, and showing her the phone. The makeup artist's brush would still, the cheerful chatter would die. The entire frantic, festive world Lucy had built would shrink to the size of that 4-inch screen. Her carefully separated realities, the successful world she aspired to, and the embarrassing world she came from, were about to collide with the force of a particle accelerator. Her mother, the quaint retiree with the hobby business, was M. Green, the notoriously private corporate raider. Her mother was Mark's new boss. Her mother owned him. My phone rang at 9:15. It was Lucy. It wasn't a call. It was a detonation. Her voice was unrecognizable, a raw, shredded sound of pure panic. The words came out in a torrent, a jumbled confession that was years in the making. She wasn't making sense at first, just gasps and sobs and fragments of sentences. But I'm her mother. I know her language. I could piece it together. Through the hysteria, I heard the raw, ugly truth of her life's great terror. It wasn't a confession of debt or of some crime. It was a confession of shame. She wept about what it was like growing up feeling like a townie, a local nobody surrounded by the children of professors and doctors. She talked about the burning embarrassment she felt over my simple life as a pharmacist, how she'd lied to her friends at her Ivy League college and told them I was a pharmaceutical executive. She sobbed about her all-consuming, desperate need to prove that she belonged in this world of power and status, to build a life so shiny and perfect that no one would ever see the cracks or guess at the humble foundation it was built on. She kept repeating it, the mantra of her deepest fear, that if you don't have the right title, the right degree, the right connections, they look right through you. She wasn't a villain. She was just a terrified child trapped in the body of a 34-year-old woman who had built a prison of her own ambition. I listened to it all, the entire pathetic, heartbreaking story of her hidden history. I didn't say a word. When the storm of her confession finally subsided into ragged breaths, the phone was silent for a moment. Then I heard Mark's voice, quiet and cold as ice. He wasn't yelling. He was speaking with a terrifying clarity. I heard him tell her to get up to have the makeup artist fix her face. And then he said the words that sealed her fate, the words that told me the power had shifted completely and irrevocably. He told her they had to go downstairs, that it was time to get married. It was time, he said, to go face his new boss. The line went dead. I placed my phone on the table, stood up, and took one last look in the mirror. My beige dress was perfectly understated. I looked harmless. I looked like furniture. I was ready. The wedding ceremony was a masterpiece of empty perfection. Lucy, her face expertly repaired into a serene bridal mask, glided down the aisle like a ghost. Mark stood at the altar, his posture rigid, his smile looking like it had been stapled into place. They recited their vows with the emotional resonance of a pre-recorded announcement. From my seat in the front row, I watched the performance my money had paid for. It was beautiful. It was hollow. It was exactly what my daughter deserved. The reception was back in the same opulent ballroom where this had all started. It was now transformed, filled to the brim with Boston's professional elite. Tech executives, venture capitalists, surgeons, all the people whose approval Lucy craved more than air. They sipped the expensive French champagne and made important small talk, unaware they were extras in a much larger drama. At the head table, the bride and groom sat enthroned in their misery. They moved through the required rituals, the cake cutting the first dance with a chilling, robotic grace. They were a perfect couple, frozen in a perfect hell of their own making. I watched them, and I waited. After the dinner plates were cleared, the toasts began. The maid of honor, blissfully unaware, gushed about Lucy's ambition. The best man made a few awkward jokes. Then the master of ceremonies announced that a special guest, Mr. Arthur Vance, the CEO of Mark's company, wanted to say a few words. Arthur, a man I knew to be a shrewd operator, walked to the microphone. He looked out at the powerful, influential crowd, not at the couple on the dais. He began by congratulating the happy couple, then his tone shifted. He said it wasn't every day that one had the opportunity to be in the presence of a true titan of industry, especially one who so valued their privacy. A murmur went through the room. This was better than wedding gossip. This was business. He spoke of a brilliant, formidable investor who had just made a major move in the tech sector. He spoke of a leader known for their strategic genius. He said it was his distinct honor to introduce the new owner of his company, who had so graciously joined them tonight. He then said, "Please join me in welcoming the one and only M. Green." Then he turned, looked directly at my table, and gestured to me. For a moment, there was nothing but the soft clinking of ice in glasses. And then as I stood up from my chair, the silence broke. It was replaced by a sound I can only describe as a shock wave of whispers. 100 of Boston's most connected people were all turning their polite smiles, melting into expressions of stunned disbelief. I saw the phones come out their screens glowing as fingers flew across keyboards. This wasn't a social event anymore. It was a market-moving revelation. The professional earthquake was no longer a tremor. It was tearing the room apart. I walked to the microphone that Arthur offered me. The room was silent, now waiting. I looked out at the sea of faces, and then my eyes found my daughter. Her face was a blank canvas of horror. I began to speak, my voice calm and steady, the voice I used in the boardroom. I thanked Arthur for his kind words and his years of service to the company. I announced as my first official act as owner that I was approving a significant company-wide bonus for all employees to thank them for their hard work during the transition and to celebrate a new era of what I called transparent and honest leadership. That earned a smattering of applause from the company employees in the room. Then I turned my gaze fully on Lucy. The entire room followed my lead. She was the sole focus of 100 pairs of intensely curious eyes. I let the silence hang for a beat. I told her, my voice holding no anger, only a devastatingly calm finality, that I wanted to thank her for this lovely, lovely party. I told her I hoped it had taught her a valuable lesson, that a person's worth is not in the title they project, but in the quiet, diligent work they actually do. I ended by saying that I was and always had been very proud of the business I had built. I placed the microphone back on its stand and walked back to my table. I didn't need to watch my daughter's reaction. I could feel it. The judgment in that room was a palpable force. It was the collective verdict of the very society she had sold her soul to impress. She hadn't just been corrected by her mother. She had been publicly audited and found to be bankrupt. In the world she valued most on the night that was meant to be her crowning achievement, she had become a social and professional liability. She was a ghost at her own feast, and this time everyone could see it. After the wedding, I didn't see my daughter. The reception ended not with a bang, but with a quiet, horrified exodus. Lucy and Mark simply vanished from the head table, while the guests were still processing the evening's stunning revelation. The silence that followed was more damning than any accusation. In Boston's elite circles, a scandal isn't just gossip. It's a career-ending, network-severing event. And Lucy had just become the star of the biggest scandal of the season. 3 months have passed since that night. The vibrant New England autumn has given way to the sharp, quiet cold of winter. I hear things, of course. I hear that Lucy and Mark are still married, their union now a strained, silent partnership, held together by a shared mortgage and mutual disgrace. I hear that Lucy was quietly and firmly pushed out of her high-powered marketing job. The social invitations, which were once the entire focus of her existence, have completely dried up. She is bitter, I'm told. Isolated in her beautiful home, she spends her days blaming everyone but herself, unable to grasp that the world she worshipped simply followed the rules she championed. It judged her by her status, and it found her worthless. Mark is a different story. He still works for me in a sense. Every Friday, a meticulously detailed report on his department's performance arrives in my inbox. We have occasional calls, always formal, always professional. There is an awkward diligence in his work, a quiet determination to prove his value on merit alone. He has never mentioned the wedding. He has never apologized for his part in it. But his work is his apology. It's his slow, difficult path toward accountability, and for that, I can offer him a quiet professional respect. He is trying to build something real, and I have decided to let him. As for me, I found that victory was a quiet, lonely place. After the acquisition was settled and the new leadership was in place, I stepped back from the day-to-day operations. The thrill of the game was gone. What I wanted was not another company, but a purpose. And I found it. I used a significant portion of my resources to launch the Greenleaf Grant, a mentorship program, and fund for young female entrepreneurs, the kind of smart, ambitious women who are constantly underestimated, who are told their ideas are cute or a nice little hobby. I spend my days now not in boardrooms, but in coffee shops and shared workspaces, listening to their brilliant ideas, helping them navigate the worlds of finance and strategy. I see my younger self in their eyes, that same fire and the same frustration. Helping them build their futures has in turn helped me build mine. This afternoon, I was at a small cafe in Cambridge, the kind of place with mismatched mugs and local art on the walls that Lucy would have called dreadfully unsophisticated. I was meeting with a young woman named Sarah, a software engineer, with an idea that could change the home healthcare industry. She was brilliant, and I knew she was going to succeed. As she was explaining her financial model, my phone buzzed. The caller ID simply said Lucy. I excused myself and answered. Her voice was small, a ghost of its former confident tone. After a few awkward pleasantries, she got to the point. She wanted money, a significant amount. She said it was to help her and Mark start over, to get away from the judgment and build a new life somewhere else. It was the same old pattern, the same belief that money could solve any problem, that a fresh coat of paint could fix a rotten foundation. I listened patiently until she was finished. I didn't feel anger, only a quiet, weary sadness. I told her that I couldn't just give her the money. I then told her about my mentorship program, about the grants we offer to women with compelling business plans. I explained that there was a formal application process, that a board reviewed every submission, and that if her plan was sound, she would be given the same consideration as anyone else. Her silence on the other end of the line was heavy with disbelief. She had expected a check, not a challenge. I told her I loved her, and then I delivered my final lesson. Her worth, I said, had to be built, not bought. Then I said goodbye and ended the call. I put my phone away and turned my full attention back to Sarah, back to the future. The new reality had settled, permanent and clear. Some things once broken can't be fixed with money. They can only be rebuilt piece by painful piece. And that was a job she had to do for herself. In a world that prizes the performance of success, true power often moves in silence. Margaret understood that a person's value wasn't measured by the noise they made, but by the foundations they quietly built. Lucy, terrified of being seen as small, made the mistake of believing the performance was everything. The final lesson wasn't just about justice. It was a painful public audit of a life built on appearances. It proved that the most devastating consequences come when you are finally and fully judged by the very standards you hold most dear. True worth is built, not bought.